about her book. And I'm going to read them because I think Cora will enjoy them. Words for Cora's launch of the beauty in the broken. Bavur an crinu de Cora agus de lawer. Ca lucher ormshiv goler ekal. It is an absolute honor and pleasure for me to have been asked by Cora to launch her first book. The beauty in the broken, here in the People's Museum, a collection of poetry and prose brought to us by Dominic Taylor, director of the Limerick Writers' Centre, and Tomás O'Quillan, the poetry editor of Revival Press. Once again, they have added another gem to Limerick's literary canon. In my blurb on the back cover, I mention that I was hooked on this debut publication from the opening title poem, The Beauty in the Broken, with its line where she stitched a seam as silver as the moon across my chest. There is a poet at work here, I thought, and sure enough, we are allowed to trace that seam back and forth like a path through the author's childhood visits to the White House with her grandad Ned. This has got to be one of the best descriptions of that Limerick landmark and its customers that I have ever read. Followed by a poem in appreciation of Dr. Noel Brown, who fought a noble battle against church and state to eradicate TB from Ireland. But the author is only warming up, and the view is not in sight yet as we travel along that seam or estuary through a brutal, harrowing account of a child in the children's sanatorium in Foynes, which is one of the best retellings of that part of Irish life, one that Patrick Galvin or even Dickens would have been proud to have written. There is a happy ending tinged with sorrow, but the journey continues with a beautifully written poem about Cora's brother Eamon, who gave her his first smile and his last. In the School of Hard Knocks, we accompany Cora through her primary and secondary education on Sexton Street with the presentation Nuns, where the child fell from grace at the tender age of 4 for repeating a phrase to a nun, overheard from a customer called Alfie on those visits to the White House with her granddad Ned. I'll get me fucking coat. It is a story where we see the personality of the author forming, independent, rebellious, Limerick to the core, one who reminds me of the women of Limerick during the sieges. And we see her humorous side in spite of the brutality where we, the readers, could easily crease ourselves. We meet Satchmo Satchmo, her loyal and faithful dog, who just before one of Cora's seizures would throw himself down on the ground to cushion her fall. There is the perpetual adoration visits and a crate of Guinness. The girl with a serious case of acne, awkward lorries in the wimpy bar on a common street, and the tragic telling of a friend's demise on the back of a motorbike that day Cora turned 17. That particular story ends with the death of her beloved Satchmo, told with such feeling that should have a tissue to hand. I did. We move on to a wonderful about Vincent van Gogh's epilepsy, a bond that only soldiers know. And then we are in Joe Malone's pub, a classic telling of a Limerick tale, one some of us in this room will be aware of, full of admiration and love for its owner Joe and the people who frequented that most Limerick of pubs, the painter Raoul Peter Jackson, the barn whose arrival in Limerick was shrouded in mystery, Bridgie McCarthy, who could put away 18 pints on a good day, Sean Burke, the writer and springer of George Blake, the poets Mark Whelan and Desmond O'Grady, the young editors of Stony Thursday, Jim Burke and myself. Our beautiful city Limerick begins one chapter in which homage is paid to musicians who performed or visited Joe's. Paddy P, Ger Costello, Peter O'Malley, Jerry Myler, Patsy Whelan, Paul Brady, Luca Bloom, Christy Moore, Charlie O'Shaughnessy, John Hannon, Bobby Daly, the Brown Brothers, Joe Deegan, and many more. I could not help noticing that most of the poems are somewhat mournful, and most of the prose pieces equally so, but sprinkled with sublime touches of Limerick humour. Dog Days is one such poem, beautifully sad, followed by a visit to the Treaty Cafe with its hilarious scene of a horse in the restaurant and the show bands who tucked into their liver and chips after gigs in the ballrooms. Tommy Fitz's punk shop is a recognition of when all we had were chips and spiffs and acid trips, mavericks, mystics. Dear Dead Romantic is as Limerick as you'll get, but like so much of this work, its strength lies in a committed social voice, keen-eyed detail and description. Every woman diminished was his mother, and he passionately fought for women's rights. The stools chained together in Eamon Gleason's White House, that ham pot, and another summer visitor was Clary, so called because he played the clarinet. But it is also the honesty of the language as exemplified in the poem Clearing Out the House. Fairground Attractions is so good that it deserves to be widely read and listened to. Perfect for Sunday miscellany. And the poem from my friend Terry Murray is a moving homage to a poet who fell in love with Limerick. The local phone box is a must for the mobile generation, and the poem, The Visitors, deserves to speak itself. For the heartsick and the loneliness of souls, to cross over and bide a while with loved ones, an ethereal communication of the living and the dead. It ends with, we are our ancestors. We will be the ancestors. We will be the stories. I'm also tempted to finish here, but I must reference the Kashmir Code, a poem about how poems are made, and the closing pieces, A Cherished Christmas, and that Dylan Thomas sounding A Childhood Christmas in Limerick, are about discovering the real Santa and a completion of the circle. We have accompanied Cora along the seam or estuary or path through part of her life, and the journey is more the view. I, as most of us here present, am grateful to be able to count Cora as a friend, as did my mother, who was also cared for in Milford Care Centre, to which from the sale of this book are earmarked. Finally, the photographs by Patrick Thomas Howard deserve their own launch. The entire production is a credit to all involved in its making, especially the courageous and honest writer Cora Peters, whom we must now read as a writer of merit. Míle buíochas as an leabhar seo, in ocht é do íthe.